You know the saying, what's done in the dark will eventually come to light. Well, not everyone escapes this universal truth. Here's a tale about being underestimated and the sweet, sweet payoff that followed. My wife, Lily, 32F, and I, Adam, 34M, have been married for 6 years. We don't have kids, though we've talked about starting a family for years. The timing never seemed right. We were always waiting to settle into a new house, get used to our jobs, or save up more money. Looking back, I think I was the only one serious about having kids. Maybe Lily just went along with it to appease me. Now, I'm questioning everything. Lily works in sales, where networking and socializing are key parts of her job. She's often attending lunches and corporate events, which she claims are vital for building social capital. I'm still not entirely sure what that means. While most events were for employees only, sometimes partners were invited and I'd tag along. It didn't feel like real work to me, just drinking, mingling, and some muttered business talks in a corner. But I wanted to be supportive, so I went. This is where I met Ryan, one of Lily's co-workers. From the moment I met him, I didn't like him. He was overly friendly in a fake, condescending way, always acting like he was better than everyone else. For example, when I told him I was a roofer, he smirked and said, "Well, that's a career choice," in the most dismissive tone possible. I brushed it off for Lily's sake, but deep down, I couldn't stand the guy. Things took a turn about a month ago at a company event. I had to leave early to get enough rest for work the next morning. As I was saying goodbye, Ryan smugly said, "Don't worry, I'll take great care of her for you." His tone and smirk sent alarm bells ringing. What made it worse was Lily's reaction. She called him an idiot, but she was laughing and blushing, as if enjoying his attention. I couldn't ignore it. My face hardened and I firmly said, "Lily's coming home with me." She started to argue, but I wasn't in the mood for debate. Sensing my frustration, she reluctantly said her goodbyes and left with me. The car ride home was tense. We didn't speak for a while, but when we did, it quickly escalated into a shouting match. Lily insisted I was overreacting to a harmless comment. I told her I didn't care about Ryan's words. I already knew he was a jerk. What hurt was how she reacted to him, openly flirting right in front of me. It made me wonder what went on when I wasn't around. Instead of addressing my concerns, she accused me of being rude to her coworker. After that argument, I stopped attending her work events. Lily became noticeably secretive about her work life and stopped mentioning Ryan altogether. Part of me was relieved, but another part of me was suspicious that I didn't want to think about Ryan. But a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Lily wasn't just avoiding mentioning him to spare my feelings. It felt like she was hiding something. Things seemed to return to normal on the surface, but that night still burned in the back of my mind. I didn't have proof of an affair, but I couldn't stop picturing her flirting with him whenever she stayed late at work. That's when I started keeping tabs on her. She hated it, but I began calling her more often when she was at work parties. Most of the time, her explanations seemed to check out. She'd answer with an annoyed tone, and I'd hear the buzz of co-workers chatting in the background. But one night, things changed. She was out with a group, like usual, schmoozing with some firm they wanted to impress. I called, and at first, it sounded normal. Laughter, glasses clinking, and conversations in the background. Then I heard it. He's calling again. It's unbelievable how clueless he is. The call ended immediately, but I'd already heard enough. It felt like a gut punch. I realized what I'd been dreading all along was true. Lily was cheating on me with Ryan, the guy I couldn't stand. Worse, they were mocking me behind my back. My first instinct was rage. I wanted to drive to wherever they were and make Ryan regret every smug comment he'd ever made. I knew I could take him. He wasn't exactly the picture of physical fitness, but I stopped myself. I didn't trust myself to keep things under control, and I didn't want to end up doing something stupid. Instead, I decided to wait at home and think things through. That's when I had an idea. If they thought I was clueless, I'd use that to my advantage. When Lily came home, I'd pretend everything was fine. Then, once she was asleep, I'd go through her phone to gather the evidence I needed. This was heading straight for divorce, and I wasn't leaving without proof. Plus, I wanted Ryan to pay for what he'd done. Lily came home much earlier than usual, looking guilty as hell. She called out my name cautiously, clearly expecting me to be upset. I was furious, but I kept my cool. I asked her how the party was and made small talk. It didn't take long for her to relax, convinced I hadn't overheard anything. We had dinner, watched TV, and pretended like everything was normal. But every time she glanced at her phone, my anger boiled. I hoped she'd send Ryan something incriminating. It would only help my case. That night, once she was asleep, I waited for her breathing to slow and deepen. When I was sure she was out cold, I grabbed her phone and unlocked it. My heart was pounding as I scrolled through her messages. Everything I'd suspected was true, and worse. Right at the top of her messages with Ryan was a text from that night. "Thank God he didn't overhear you. They'd been laughing at me, mocking me for not catching on." As I kept reading, I found proof that they'd been having an affair for 6 months. They'd rented hotel rooms, gone on dates, and slept together, all on nights when I wasn't invited to her work events. I texted every message to myself, making sure I had all the proof I needed. It wasn't easy reading those messages. They were disgusting, and every new text filled me with more anger. Once I had everything, I was done pretending. I shook her awake, not roughly, but enough to snap her out of her sleep. She woke up groggy and confused, but quickly realized what was happening when she saw her phone in my hand. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" I asked, my voice cold. She looked at me wide-eyed and tried to defend herself. "You had no right to go through my phone," she said, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and fear. Apparently, I was the bad guy for invading her privacy, not her, for betraying me that I couldn't believe how much Claire seemed to buy into her own nonsense. She started accusing me of violating her privacy, acting as though I was the bad guy. I couldn't listen to another second of it. Cutting her off, I told her I'd overheard Gary's remark about how clueless I was. I laid it all out, how I'd had my suspicions for months, and how her behavior had only confirmed them. I told her I had every right to go through her phone after what she'd done. She had no response at first, just silence. Then, after a long pause, she started tearing up and begged me to hear her out. That's when the victim act began. She claimed Gary had pressured her, even threatening her job if she didn't go along with it, and that everything escalated from there. According to her, the affair was all about protecting her career. I didn't buy it for a second. The messages I'd read told a different story, one that started with her flirting. Most of the advances came from her at first. I told her I wasn't interested in her excuses. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice, a deliberate betrayal. I made it clear that we were done, and I'd be filing for divorce first thing in the morning. That's when the waterworks started. She begged me not to throw away our marriage, swearing she still loved me and that we could fix things. I couldn't help but laugh. Half a year of sneaking around, betraying me, and mocking me with another man isn't a mistake. It's a pattern. She cried harder, pleading for another chance. But I wasn't interested. I told her to save her tears for someone who cared. She spent the rest of the night begging and sobbing, but I shut her out. When she realized I wasn't going to change my mind, she cried herself to sleep. By morning, I was out of the house before she woke up. I had a lot to do, but the first priority was contacting a divorce lawyer. Taking that first step felt like I was finally regaining control. Justice for Gary. Once the divorce was underway, I shifted my focus to Gary. I knew he had a wife and kids, a whole family he'd been willing to destroy for the sake of an affair. I felt bad for his wife Amy and their kids, but I believed she deserved to know the truth. It didn't take long to find Amy's Facebook account. I introduced myself, reminding her that we'd met briefly in the past, and explained why I was reaching out. I told her about the affair, how it had gone on for months behind both our backs. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I sent her screenshots of their texts, even censored versions of the explicit photos they'd exchanged. It wasn't easy, but she deserved to see the full picture. Amy didn't reply right away. When she finally did, she asked if it was true. She said she'd heard about my divorce, but hadn't suspected her husband was involved. I confirmed everything, providing all the evidence I had. It took her a while to process. I knew how devastating it must have been. Seeing those messages for the first time had felt like a punch to the gut for me, too. The next morning, Amy messaged me again. She'd confronted Gary, and they'd had a massive fight. She told me she'd kicked him out and was considering divorce. I didn't hesitate to recommend my lawyer. He'd been a lifesaver for me, and I figured he could help her. Too that I didn't hear much from Amy after that, but my ex-wife, Claire, made sure to let me know how things were going. Furious, she called me a petty and insecure man for ruining Gary's life. I couldn't help but laugh. She was defending the man she'd cheated on me with. I told her I didn't sympathize with cheaters. She sputtered angrily, which only made the conversation more satisfying. It turned out Amy had reported Gary to HR at their company. The firm had a strict no-fraternization policy, and they launched an investigation immediately. Both Gary and Claire were under scrutiny, and their co-workers had already started treating them differently. Clients had heard whispers, too. Claire was on the verge of resigning when she called me, practically in tears. She sarcastically asked if I was happy now. I didn't even hesitate. Yes, I'm thrilled. I ended the call shortly after, telling her, at least you and Gary still have each other. But they didn't. I later learned from Amy that Gary's life had completely fallen apart. His marriage was over. His kids wanted nothing to do with him, and he lost his job after the HR investigation. He left town not long after to AS for me. I'm finally moving forward. I still have my business, my pride, and the freedom to rebuild my life without Claire. Gary and Claire thought they could play with people's lives without consequence. In the end, they lost everything, while I gained a fresh start.